Well, hello there.
General Kenobi!
You know what polarizes people on the internet? Guys like me having an opinion about your favorite stuff. So why don't you grab your hot beverage of choice, join me today as we polarize the internet once again, and do the sci-fi tier list of sci-fi's best and worst tanks. Welcome back to another episode of A Tanker's View with me, your average tanker, Tony. This week, I bit off way more than I can chew, and this is my third time going at it. First time, the audio didn't record correctly at all. The second time, you could hear fire trucks and ambulances outside, I guess, for more than half of it, and I couldn't filter it out. So we're going to try again, round 3. Third time's a charm. Let's do this. So what I've done is I've taken 5 or 6, of our favorite franchises. What's it just stroke that algorithm just right to get this up there in the views.
Yeah, boy.
And I've sprinkled in about 4 or 5 tanks with a few exceptions here and there that we're just going to run up and down the tier list. As you can see here, my tier list ranges from epic, A, B, C, D, and what the hell is wrong with you? But before I carry on with that and move on with the rules, these are the socials. Please do like, share, subscribe. It really does help me in the algorithm. It actually, it shows that if you ask someone, they will do it. So please do like, share, subscribe. Maybe join the socials. Maybe join the Patreon, watch parties, Discord, all the good stuff. There's channel memberships too. And with all my pertinent e-begging out of the way, thank you for watching. I really do appreciate it. On with the video. So, like I stated before, I shamelessly e-begged there for a few seconds. There are some rules to this. I've taken 5 or 6 of our favorite franchises, which are sure to just ride that algorithmic wave. Taken 4 or 5 tanks from each one of those franchises, mixed them all up in a folder, and we're just going to rank them from epic to what the hell is wrong with you. This is my own subjective opinion only. So if you're going to rip me apart in the comments, make it funny, for the love of God. I need a laugh, guys. Make it hurt. Moving on. Like I said, this is just my subjective opinion. I've taken tanks from all these franchises, a few Titans and Walkers that have comparable armaments to a main battle tank. That was my parameter for this one. There's going to be a coming tier list for Titans coming up, and super, super heavy tanks. Like, I'm talking in excess of 10,000 tons.
That's a huge bitch!
If that'll make everybody happy, which I'm sure it won't, but I'm sure it'll please at least enough of you. Anyways, let us begin. So, stamping right out of the gate, we are going to be starting with the Warhound Titan from Warhammer 40k, because why the hell not? That's just bound to get some clicks right to start with. Now, I'm going to rank this, I'd say B category. As far as Titans go, it is one that actually makes the most amount of sense. It mostly suppresses infantry, scouts ahead of the main body of Titan legions, and it has digitigrade. I'm going to wind up saying this a half a dozen times wrong. Digitigrade legs, which make the most amount of sense for shock absorption and stabilization when engaging enemies on the move. On top of that, it's actually got a 360-degree rotational head, body, and firearms. So it doesn't just have forward-facing abilities. This thing can walk backwards, or rather walk forwards while firing backwards looking at its enemy, presenting its strongest armor forward. That's pretty smart, and given that this is the Warhammer 40k and the Imperial Man, those are few and far between moments, so let's take the W right out of the gate. I only deduct points because, as fun as they are still quite vulnerable. But that's kind of par for the course for Titans. Next up is going to be the Gallion light tank. Fast and nimble. Lightly armored, lightly armed, but easily fixable, mass producible, and it's able to be operated by the lowest common denominator. You can fix this thing fairly easily in the field with a hammer and a plucky attitude and apparently a bunch of teenagers from high school, but Japan do what Japan do, right? But I'm going to rank this an A because in terms of a tank, it's actually really competent and it makes the most amount of sense for the universe that it's in, despite being vastly outgunned by the Imperial heavy tanks. Next in line, from a galaxy far, far away and an intelligence far, far, too far down the bell curve, I bring you the AAT, Armored Assault Tank, the crappiest and one of the worst designed tanks of the Clone Wars. You know what? It's the Clone Wars. All the tanks were absolutely terrible. There's just no redeeming qualities for any of them. So, but, before all the Star Wars nerds bugger off, I suppose out of all of the tanks in Star Wars, the AAT is the least offensive and probably the closest thing to an actual tank in universe, despite being designed ass backwards and run by more robots. A robot tank that is run by robots. That's the technology we're dealing with here in the universe we're dealing with, because it is the most competent of all Star Wars tanks. And keep in mind, that is a goddamn low bar. Like, we're not making any records here. I'm going to rank it a solid C. Probably don't expect to see it get much higher than that for Star Wars. You see what I did there? Oh, that was a terrible dad joke. Next up, the Soviet Apocalypse Tank. And oddly enough, the only time that the Russian army doesn't suck is when it's in a video game, but that's neither here nor there. The Apocalypse Tank. The dream of most RTS gamers everywhere. Your top tier tank, your level 10 tank. Twin barrels, missile launchers, can run over lighter tanks. Slow, cumbersome, heavy, but it can take an absolute beating. But it's expensive. And again, slow and vulnerable to air power en masse. But you know what? It's still just a, you know what? The voice alone for these tanks in game should get this a higher rank on the list, but I've got to be fair. So I'm going to rank this one a B. Yeah, it can take a lot of damage and it can deal damage out, but it's just really, really slow on the battlefield, and that makes it its biggest liability to swarms. Next up is another terrible idea from a galaxy far, far away. We've got the Star Wars Grand Republic ATTE, or just, well, it's just terrible. I don't have another name for it. It's just goddamn terrible. This thing supposedly can do 60 kilometers an hour at a gallop, while somehow not turning the inside into the world's worst baby shaker. But that's neither here nor there. It's got an exposed turret on top. It's a walker with no shock absorption capabilities that you can really see. Apparently you can walk up walls due to anti-gravity or magnets or space wizardry. I really do hate this thing, but it is quasi-competent in the field and can dish out some form of punishment. But it's going to get maybe a D tier tops. That's the best I can do for this thing. There's just so much fundamentally wrong with its design that I can't rank it any higher than that. In fact, if I were any more biased, I would just toss it even out of this video. But I promise to shake it up a little bit. Next up is 40K Chris Hansen's absolute worst nightmare, the Predator tank. Yeah, it's a terrible joke. I'm going to roll with it anyway. Too bad. This thing, technically, despite being an infantry fighting vehicle because it both fights with the infantry and transports them to the battlefield, still possesses enough firepower and can be modified to possess the firepower of main battle tanks. So for that reason alone, I am going to inch it onto this list. And we move it up to a solid C because, yes, it isn't a Astartes vehicle, but it's not a purpose-built Astartes vehicle that can be, that is a tank. It's an upgradable IFV. So with that, it's going to get C tier this time around. Next up is a vehicle that few people have probably ever heard of, let alone seen in science fiction. The Bolo Mark III. Designed right around actually this time frame in an alternate universe. The Bolo Mark III is basically what you would call sort of a Mary Sue tank, or, pretty much a Mary Sue tank. The only other vehicles that can actually defeat it are other Bolos. That's because they possess molecular nano-built solid-state crystal hulls, which are basically called Dura-alloy and flint steel. And these two combined in various patterns make their hulls damn near impregnable to everything up to including not a direct nuclear blast, but close enough. And in the future, this actually gets more and more technical, and you wind up with like AI autonomously driven bolos that are 33,000 to 39,000 metric tons and can literally burn planets. But so the Bolo Mark III, being basically the predecessor, the great granddaddy to it all, basically embodies everything that a 40K tank would be if it were designed rather actually competently. Yes, it's got most of the things I hate in tanks, like multiple gun turrets and whatnot, but in this way it also makes sense because it's also AI driven. But it's still, the predecessor and still quasi-defeatable by other tanks that are comparable to it. And at 300 tons, it's probably one of closer to the heaviest tanks that's going to be on this list. It's an actual tank. So it's going to get a B ranking. Next up is from Transformers, and it's going to be Brawler. That's right, the big effing tank from Transformers 1, Brawler. Basically an up-gunned, up-armored Abrams with a mine pile on front. Again, everything I hate in tanks, multiple turrets, multiple guns on turrets. But it's a Transformer, and it makes my goddamn 13-year-old heart just happy. But it's still an absolutely atrocious design for a tank, even though it is alien. Literally an alien. It's going to get a C for me. Next is, well, whatever the fuck this thing is. Like, what is this? This looks like what happens if you ask someone to describe a tank to someone who's never seen a tank before. Or this is what happens when you let a government committee design a tank. This is what happens when you let a 5-year-old on LSD design a tank. At this point, they're just fucking with us. This is getting dumped into the right to what the F is wrong with you. At this point, they weren't even trying. Like, this looks like what happens when you ask ChatGPT to design a tank. What a pile of crap. Next up is the Mark III Devil's Tongue Flame Tank from the Brotherhood of Nod and CNC3 Tiberium Wars. I picked this one in particular because, well, for one, it's the most fleshed out and awesome looking. The Devil's Tongue Mark II Subterranean Flame Tank, well, it looked redonkulous, and it was even more functionally redonkulous, but that's coming up in another video sometime down the line. This one looks pretty epic. It's got twin flamers. Its voice acting is just chef's kiss. Absolutely wonderful. However, it does have a glowing list of flaws, mostly that it is a giant explodable flame tank, but there's just something to be said about being able to set your enemies on fire from across the battlefield, from the comfort of a chair. It's heartwarming. It really is. But it's going to get an A from me, boys. It's going up there. I love this one in particular, even though it is, completely and utterly flawed. It gets an A from me just because it's that fucking awesome. Next is the tank named for old blood and guts from World War II, the Patton from the Battletech universe. Look at this carefully. What does it say to you? It says, I'm a tank. I am a tank and nothing more. I've got a turret, I've got a gun, I've got a coax, I might have some missiles, I've got some tracks. I'm a tank, no more, no less. What you see is what you get. And for a science fiction universe, you know what? That's a breath of fresh air. And just for that simplicity of perfection, it gets an A. You know what? F it. I am upgrading that to epic class. It is just perfect. You know what? We should maybe get back to some of those franchises that the people do love, like Warhammer 40K as well. And next up, we've got the Chimera. Again, yeah, it's an IFV. But guess what? It still gets treated like a tank as well. Can it be upgunned to it like a tank? Oh, you goddamn right it can. Can it take a shot like a tank? You goddamn right it can't. No, it cannot. So, will it count it as a tank? You goddamn right I might. There's not a whole lot to say about this one. This is just a good all-around vehicle. You know what? It's from the Guard, so it gets those extra few bonus points for being for Joe Everyman in the, Imperial Guard. Poor Cadia. But my heart will go on to Catachan. Next up. Welcome back to the second part of this. As you've seen from the card before, why I had to take a brief break. So next I think we're going to look at what happens when you put everything I hate into a tank all at once. Yeah, the siege tank from StarCraft. Oh, this thing is just undeniably horrible in every aspect in reality. It's going straight into the what is wrong with you category. Not only does it have 4 tracks, it deploys into legs. It has 2 barrels. It doesn't serve the function as artillery or as a tank very well in either respect. All in all, this thing is just... this is a potato. This is just a straight potato. Next is going to be the ThE Hammerhead, because we haven't had a hover tank in 5 minutes, and I kind of like it. Not as much as you might think, but it's still on the list. Now, I've got my problems with the ThE Hammerhead, mostly in the forward gun placements and the obscenely large jet intakes on the side that are just wildly vulnerable to grenade action. However, it is still one of the more technologically advanced tanks on this list. However, it is not enough to save it from being placed, I'm going to say, firmly in the D category. It's great if you can get away with, sniping from long-range distances, but once you get a little too close, this thing has got way too many flaws to hide. Next up is from the next franchise that just doesn't take itself seriously at all. Command & Conquer Red Alert 2. Nothing but memes and dreams. Video games were so much simpler back then, and enjoyable, especially the cover art. Does anybody actually remember the original cover art to Red Alert 2? You won't find it much anywhere. I wish I still had the box, but it had the Twin Towers actually taking a hit. So the tank I chose from this one is going to be the French Mirage tank. Yep, it's a tank, but it can camouflage itself as a tree. It's got a nice high velocity, high explosive shell, and they were great for ambushing. But you know what? It's still primarily, a tank. It's got a few extra little bells and whistles, big old shot traps on the side, but you're not supposed to be seen. Shoot, hide. It works. But you know what? It's still going to wind up on the C tier list just because it's got those nice big shot traps. Coming up next, it's from a franchise that I simultaneously love and hate. Love it because it was fun to play, had a deep and interesting storyline, but god damn, every piece of equipment in it just made my head hurt. I don't know if it was just the ThE or, my inescapable eye of just sci-fi stupidity, but we're going to pick up the Wraith from the Covenant from Bungie's Halo. Yes, Bungie's Halo, not 343, Bungie. Anyways, I'm putting it firmly in the D category simply because, well, it's about the only competent piece of equipment that the Covenant managed to produce. Yes, it's technically a indirect fire system, but a skilled enough gunner can, drop 3 or 4 targets before the first shell lands. That's got to be worth something. So, despite its obvious flaws, like the fact that it's a hover tank that can get stuck on pretty much anything, the huge gaping, weak spots in the rear of it, and the dismal fire rate, it's still going to get a D. Yeah, just D. How about some GDI walker action? We haven't had a walker in a few minutes either. But we're going to pick the GDI Titan, or basically their Battle Tank Mark II. Now, I'm going to put this firmly in the A tier list, and there's a specific couple of reasons for this. Despite it being a walker and a little bit more complicated than it needs to be, it still pretty much is just a tank. It has just the gun, a coax, its head section, quote unquote, swivels around 360 degrees. It tries to keep it minimum. Doesn't make it fancy, doesn't add extra arms or, all sorts of spacey stuff. It is just as is a tank on legs. No more, no less. And for that simplicity and its nice clean design, like if you made an Abrams a walker, that is what I would imagine it to look like. And it's mint just for that. So, A category. Next up is a walker that's likely to be either the biggest walker on this list or the second biggest walker, depending on which lore you tend to follow. And that's the AT-AT from Star Wars. Now, the reason I say second biggest or maybe biggest is depending on what size you actually believe the Warhound Titan, to be. Some say it's 30 meters tall, so it would be just as tall as the AT-AT, or some say it's 12 meters tall, some say it's 18 meters tall. Honestly, if I were to go with the most optimistic estimate, I would say it is the same size as the AT-AT. However, I would like to believe it to be just a little bit smaller, at least from some of the art I've seen. It appears to be around the 20-meter range, leaving the AT-AT as the biggest walker. Now, there is no redeeming qualities on this thing. It can be easily undermined. It has got dismal arcs of fire. It can be seen from miles away and targeted with artillery. It is slow, inefficient, supposedly, heavily armored and nigh indestructible, but we seem to see them get blown up all the time or literally tripped up by speed racers. That's a pretty scathing indictment of the tactical supremacy of the Empire. This thing is a camel given metal form. And it's not even fat in the hump. It's just a bunch of dead stormtroopers. Like, you figure if the Empire were going to base their entire armored contingent around walkers, you think they would at least employ some competent design engineers. But no. Big, tall, very narrow in profile, and crappily armed. Let's face it, those turbo lasers on front can only get like a 20-degree arc. That thing has got a sweeping blind spot 270 degrees around and probably 270 degrees in a full sphere. There's nothing good about this thing. Not at all. So it goes in the what the hell is wrong with you category. Let's cap out this crap sandwich with the AT-AT slightly retarded younger brother, the AT-ST. Clocking in at probably a stout 12 meters tall tops. This thing is light, fast on its feet, has decent arcs of fire, armor's pretty abysmal, all of the control surfaces are fairly exposed, it can be tripped by a rope, knocked over by a catapult tossing rocks roughly the size of a overstuffed teddy bear, and yeah, you know what, it's going to go for the C on my list, because that's about as high as I think I can, really rate any Star Wars equipment while maintaining my integrity. I don't understand why the Empire chose to employ walkers for almost all of its armored units, but it is certainly ridiculous. Okay, coming up next we've got the Manticore from the Battletech universe. The Rudy Tooty, all the missile shooty splooty. This thing has got 2 packs of missiles, a single gun on a turret, and a coax/bow-mounted laser gun on it. This thing is, well, it's very much a tank, and what really only thing that gives me problems is the missiles. They're just in a terrible spot. I don't like where they are. The sensor suites are just, they're over large and in the way. Now, I get that a lot of the fire is coming down on this thing from other mechs. I understand that. That's fair. I get it. However, it would seem to make more sense that you would want them in VLS cells, maybe slightly back out of the way. They can't be picked off from, a meter-wide laser cannon from 2 kilometers out. But that's just me. Me personally, I also think it would look cooler if, little hatch just popped open in the back and this thing, just started shitting missiles out, 20 at a time. That would be baller. Next on my list is the Tachikoma from Ghost in the Shell. As cute as these squirrely little buggers are, and as fun as their dialogue is, there is just nothing correct when it comes to a spider tank. You either want legs or you want wheels. Adding both just means you're going to destroy both twice as fast. There's no redeeming qualities to that whatsoever. And on top of that, the cab of this thing is so tight that if this thing takes a hit, there's no room for you to move around before you're literally impacting a bulkhead. And that squishy little bits inside of you, your little brain case, is going to rattle around, rendering you unconscious. Although, it does look fun. I must admit, shooting little spider things out of this thing and flying through the city like, you know, Spider-Man, for lack of better words, you know, that would be freaking hilarious. So it'll go on the D list, but as an actual tank, its stubby little gun and machine guns just don't do a whole lot. And the fact that any hit this thing takes is going to pretty much knock the driver unconscious is a pretty other big mark against it. So, D. Up next, what happens if you can't decide if you want a mech or a tank? Why not both? That way you can get the worst qualities of both vehicles out of the way and hopefully get nothing but good. Unfortunately, that's not what happened here. This is the RX-95. Oh, sorry, RX-75 from the Gundam universe. This thing has got giant shoulder cannons, arms, a upper torso turret for some reason, and large oversized tracks. This thing is rather reminiscent of the Crawler Terminator from T1 and T2, but looks like the guys at Gundam decided to just change it enough so it didn't look like they were copying James Cameron's homework. I don't understand why you would put two big shoulder cannons on it than two little arms underneath. Why not make the guns on the arms? That way you can individually swivel and target. Instead, now you've just got crappy arcs that aren't targeting anything. This is terrible. What is wrong with you? Pick one or the other. Don't try to slap it together. It always looks just redonkulous. Speaking of utterly redonkulous, what's another sci-fi franchise that just screams its branding out to the sun every time they're on the screen? Did Cobra come to mind? No? How about the Brotherhood of Nod? They love branding everything. And here we've got the Scorpion Light Tank, taking all the lessons learned from Armored Warfare and promptly throwing it out the window. You've got a three-wheeled chassis that's a rear steer like a forklift. You've got a gun so wildly out of center and exposed that it can be taken out by a light pole. And instead of an armored cockpit, you've got a giant red bubble. I guess you just want to really illustrate to your enemy where to shoot first. Nod can do so much better than this. Come on, the flame tank made it to A tier. What is this? You took the stealth light tank and screwed that up. You've got the stealth light tank chassis and you screwed it up. Sorry, Kane. This one does not bring peace through power. This will make your enemy laugh and piss themselves. Hey, we haven't had a Warhammer vehicle in about 5 minutes, so how about an Eldar fire prism? Essentially, it's a glass cannon. It's a very powerful gun. However, it is a very lightly armored tank. Rather grab tank, and it's made of Wraith bone. However, comparatively speaking to its contemporaries, not nearly heavily as armed and armored as a, Imperial tank. However, it is blisteringly fast, capable of short flight hops. It's more of a gunship than, I would say, a tank. But seeing as in the tabletop and in the lore it's treated as a tank, I will give it that credit. B tier. Just because it's about the coolest thing that the Eldar have in terms of a tank. And heck, next, why not just another Gundam tank as well? Next up, we've got the Type 61. Now, this thing sports, I believe, a twin 120mm barrels, and actually a decently sloped chassis, a decently lower profile turret for the size of armament side of it. I'm assuming it's a remote turret as well, given the size. I don't know much about this universe. However, I really do hate the fact that a lot of these universes use two-gun turrets, despite the fact that it's not practical in any way, shape, or form, unless you're literally trying to saturate an area with shells, in which case it's just easier to call in a battery of artillery. A tank is meant to be a sniper rifle on the battlefield. A very loud sniper rifle, but a sniper rifle nonetheless. One shot, one kill is supposed to be the job of a tank. So, you know what? It's going to get D category because it's fairly well designed in terms of like 95% of it. You know, if this thing had just one barrel, even one larger barrel, like say a 150 autoloader in it, that would still be, that would elevate this to A tier. But the twin barrels just, I don't even think they look cool. It just, like in my mind, it looks redonkulous. I would rather see something with, 16 guns all over it than a twin gun turret. It just kind of drives me batty, unless it's the machine guns, in which case more machine guns the merrier, like all of the machine guns. But twin main gun tank guns, nah, that's no bueno for me. And while we're on the two-gun kick, you know what? The Rogal Dorn. And I'm going to elevate this to B tier. Even though some models have two guns, a lot of them have one main gun, one auto gun. Sometimes they've got the twin battle cannon, and I think that looks stupid. But, the one las cannon and then the 130mm auto gun beside it. On top of that, it looks like a badass cross between a Sherman, the M48 Patton, and a Churchill, and just in all the right proportions to make it look awesome. Not too keen on the nipple guns up front, but you can't win everything. But overall, this thing is, pretty awesome for an Astra Militarum tank. And the fact that it's more for the Astra Militarum and the Astartes don't use it, that's all the better for me, because quite frankly, they needed a new tank armor for a while. And the fact that how they brought this thing into the lore, also pretty awesome. They didn't shoehorn it in. So next up, how about we switch back to Memes and Dreams, back to Red Alert 2, and the Prism tank. Likely to be one of the more controversial additions to my list, because it's basically just a giant laser gun. It is a laser gun and nothing else. But you know what? It's OP as shit. And I'm still going to call it a tank because it's got one gun on top. It's got a turret that, Prism gun swings around 360 degrees. It's got tracks and a big armored hull. So yeah, tank. However, glass cannon status. It's obscenely powerful, but it's also lightly armored as shit. So C tier. And I think that's a pretty reasonable catch for this one. And you know what? This is probably my most hated tank of all time. And I'm going to just throw it right into the what is wrong with you category because there isn't a single redeeming quality about it. UNSC Scorpion. Try and defend it all of you want. There's zero redeeming qualities to this. They went for all of the rule of cool, threw it on there, and made it look just dumb. Like the rear-mounted cannon, the holes in the hull, 4 tracks that could get literally hung up on anything. Again, not a single redeeming quality. This entire thing is an exercise in just military procurement just not doing its job properly. R&D shitting the bed. So straight into the what is wrong with you category. Next up, you guys are more than probably chomping to find out where I place this on the list, and you're probably willing to find that I'm placing it, well, firmly in the A category. The much memed on Leman Russ. And oddly enough, one of the reasons this channel actually really took off. Thanks, Leman Russ video. You're awesome. And continuing on that, yes, it's in the A category. Because despite some of my minor complaints about it, it is you know what? It's a tank and it's competent. It is highly customizable. It is good for the universe it's in. Some of its more glaring flaws can be overlooked due to the fact that artistic license is a thing. But overall, even in lore, very competent tank. Just as is, does the job, you know exactly what it's going to do, you know exactly how to fix it, and it's used by normal humans, which also makes this happy. So, next up is going to be, oh yeah, maybe one of the biggest boys on this list, an Imperial Knight. For a walker, it's epic. And here's why. It's meant for close quarters mech combat. This thing is, well, approximately anywhere between 12 and 30 meters tall, apparently, according to the lore, depending on where you want to look. However, it's a giant walking robot with a chainsaw sword and a little battle cannon, an auto battle cannon on its other arm. The pilot is actually tucked well inside of the chassis instead of, riding where it's stupid. Most of its control surfaces are obscenely armored or covered. And you know what? It looks badass. Yeah, I know I'm using the rule of cool on this one, but and face it, Imperial Knights, something about them just looks like they're here to fuck. And I'm here for that. Chainsaw swords and all. Nearing the end of our list, we've got the General Dynamics Mark II Bolo, designed to work in conjunction with the Mark III, which were both put out roughly at the same time within, I believe, 2 years of each other. Designed to work in pairs. Now, this thing is an actual tank, whereas the other one is a larger multiple engagement tank / siege engine. This one is just single gun on a single turret. It's got close-in weapon systems. It's got repeater autocannons on the side for dealing with soft targets. And it's fast. Probably one of the fastest tanks on this list. But it's also competent, bare bones, streamlined, and extraordinarily deadly. So with that, it's going to get a B list on this one. Only because I believe it could have been written a little bit better. However, you know what? It was written 60 years ago, so I'll deal with it. Continuing to shit the bed at every opportunity, the Star Wars universe. Repulsor lift tanks. Doesn't want to sit too high off the ground. A typical problem for Star Wars hover vehicles. Crappy turret with, well, crappy arcs of fire. Shitty depression and elevation. But the only thing right on this is the sloping of the armor. Missile launchers in back are a little bit well placed. However, crap visibility, giant open visor ports in the front. Come on. Do you want your crew to take a sniper shot? I don't know what's wrong with the designers in the Star Wars universe, but lay off the cocaine. And to end out this list, the other tank that helped make this channel what it is today, the Baneblade. And you had to be shitting me if you didn't think I wasn't going to shove it straight into the epic column, because the Baneblade is exactly what would happen if you took a main battle tank to its logical conclusion without stepping into late Mark Bolo territory. If you don't know what I mean by that, what I mean is like a ridiculously take all the guns on an Imperator Titan, slap it onto what you would essentially be a tank that is about as large as a football stadium, like the stadium, not the field, the stadium itself, the whole stadium. Slap all those guns onto that, and then like quadruple it. That's a late Mark Bolo, for those who aren't aware of what the Bolos are. Now, it is a tank, taken to its logical conclusion. It sits on the battlefield, it goes with the infantry, it engages other armored vehicles, and it does it remarkably well. Yeah, it's the size of several small houses or one large house, but, gotta have room. Bunk beds. All activities. Lots of room for activities. Anyway, guys, that's going to be this list this time around. Next list up is going to be Titans and Walkers. And, super, super heavy tanks. I'm talking like, 10,000 tons plus. So if you got anything in the comments you want to see on that list, do put it in there. And I will make sure to try and include all of it. If we start getting to like, 30 mechs, then, I might have to trim the fat just a little bit. But we'll try to squeeze everything we can on. If you didn't see your favorite tank on this list this time, there still might be another coming. Don't you fret. Anyways, guys, thank you all for watching. Please do subscribe to my socials if you see them back up on the screen, and I will see you all next time.